For over 4,000 years, a civilization of unparalleled continuity has thrived along the fertile plains of the Yellow River. Here, in the heartland of China, early communities forged societies that would become the legendary Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties. These ancient kingdoms laid the groundwork for a civilization that would shape human history, creating systems of governance, art, and belief that define China to this day. Around 1600 BCE, the Shang dynasty gave the world one of its greatest gifts, writing. On oracle bones, the earliest Chinese characters were etched, a direct link connecting the modern nation to its most distant ancestors. The Shang also mastered bronze casting and built a centralized state. They were succeeded by the Zhou, who introduced a powerful idea that would resonate for millennia, the mandate of heaven. This philosophy held that a ruler's right to govern was not absolute, but depended on their virtue and their duty to care for the people. It was a concept that placed moral responsibility at the very core of political power. As centuries passed, it wasn't just emperors and armies that shaped China, but thinkers and philosophers. The great sage Confucius taught the importance of moral order, respect for elders, and the duties that bind a society together. In contrast, Laozi, the legendary author of the Tao Te Ching, encouraged a life of simplicity and harmony with the natural flow of the universe. Meanwhile, legalist thinkers argued for strict laws and strong centralized authority to maintain order. These competing yet complementary philosophies created a civilization built on a delicate balance between discipline and freedom, between the individual and the community. This age of philosophical ferment and warring states came to a dramatic end in 221 BCE. A formidable ruler, Qin Shi Huang, conquered his rivals and forged a unified Chinese empire. He was a ruthless but visionary leader. He standardized writing, currency, and weights and measures, creating a common identity for his vast new nation. He also connected existing fortifications to form the precursor to the Great Wall, a monumental testament to his ambition to defend and define China. Though his dynasty was short-lived, Qin Shi Huang's legacy was immense. He had created the very blueprint for a united China. Following the collapse of the Qin, the Han dynasty rose to power, ushering in a golden age of stability and prosperity that lasted for 4 centuries. It was during this era that the legendary Silk Road was born. This network of trade routes became the artery connecting China to the wider world. Chinese silk, porcelain, and groundbreaking inventions like paper traveled west, while new ideas, cultures, and religions flowed into the empire. China was no longer just a regional power. It was a global hub of commerce and innovation. Over the next millennium, successive dynasties, the Tang, Song, Yuan, and Ming, each added their own brilliant chapter to China's story. The Tang dynasty was a cosmopolitan age of unparalleled poetic and artistic expression. The Song dynasty gave the world revolutionary technologies like movable type printing, gunpowder, and the magnetic compass, innovations that would later transform the entire globe. Later, under the Ming dynasty, grand treasure fleets commanded by the Admiral Zheng, who sailed as far as the coast of Africa, showcasing China's maritime power and technological prowess. At its zenith, China was arguably the most advanced civilization on Earth, a literate, organized, and deeply confident society. But this long history of achievement fostered a powerful sense of self-sufficiency. China saw itself as the Middle Kingdom, the civilized center of the world, and gradually turned inward. The empire valued stability over expansion, and harmony over the disruptive forces of change. For thousands of years, this philosophy had been a source of strength, shielding China from chaos. But as a new modern world began to dawn beyond its borders, this inward focus would soon become a critical vulnerability. By the 18th century, a monumental shift was occurring. While European nations were being transformed by the Industrial Revolution and embarking on ambitious colonial expansions, China's Qing dynasty remained firmly rooted in its ancient imperial traditions. Proud and seemingly unshakable, the Qing court believed China had little to learn or gain from the so-called barbarians of the West. Trade was heavily restricted, confined to the southern port of Canton, as the empire sought to limit foreign influence. This arrangement, however, created a massive trade imbalance. Britain, in particular, was spending vast sums of silver on Chinese tea, silk, and porcelain. Desperate to reverse this flow of wealth, the British found a sinister solution: opium. By the early 19th century, British merchants began smuggling massive quantities of opium into China. Addiction spiraled out of control, devastating communities and draining the empire's silver reserves. When the Qing emperor finally moved to crush the drug trade, Britain responded not with diplomacy, but with gunboats. The First Opium War, which began in 1839, was a shocking and humiliating ordeal for China. Its traditional armies were no match for Britain's modern military technology. The resulting Treaty of Nanking was the first of many unequal treaties. China was forced to cede Hong Kong to Britain, open its ports to foreign trade, and pay massive reparations. The door to the Middle Kingdom had been kicked open. The decades that followed brought even greater humiliation. Other Western powers, and a rapidly modernizing Japan, demanded the same concessions that Britain had won. The Second Opium War led to the looting and burning of the emperor's summer palace, a profound symbol of the dynasty's weakness. Foreign powers carved out concessions in major cities, territories where they were exempt from Chinese law. The once mighty empire was being sliced up like a melon. The Qing court, plagued by corruption and resistant to fundamental reform, seemed powerless to stop the decline. As the dynasty faltered, the suffering of the Chinese people intensified. Poverty, famine, and resentment exploded into the Taiping Rebellion in 1850. Part Christian-inspired mystical movement, part peasant uprising, it became one of the bloodiest civil wars in human history, claiming tens of millions of lives and leaving vast swathes of the country in ruins. Towards the end of the century, another desperate uprising, the Boxer Rebellion, sought to violently expel all foreigners. But this too was crushed by an international coalition, resulting in yet more foreign control and national disillusionment. By the dawn of the 20th century, the phrase, "the sick man of Asia," had become a common, painful descriptor for China. This period, known as the Century of Humiliation, saw the nation stripped of its sovereignty, its economy dominated by foreign interests, and its people's pride eroded. But even in this darkest hour, new ideas were beginning to shine through. Reformers and intellectuals grappled with agonizing questions. How could China modernize without losing its soul? How could an ancient empire survive in a world of machines and modern armies? An early attempt at reform, the self-strengthening movement, tried to blend Chinese traditions with Western technology, but it was too little, too late. As the old order crumbled, more radical, revolutionary ideas gained ground. The final blow came in 1911. A revolution swept across the country, and the imperial system that had governed China for over 2,000 years collapsed. The last emperor abdicated, marking the end of an era. China was left a nation adrift, stripped of its ancient glory and facing an uncertain future. The years that followed would be filled with division, warlords, and war. But from the ashes of humiliation, the seeds of a new China were being sown, a nation determined to rise again and redefine its place in the world. In 1911, after thousands of years of imperial rule, the Qing dynasty fell. A new Republic of China was born, founded on the dreams of Dr. Sun Yat-sen. But this dream quickly fractured. Warlords carved up the country, and foreign powers preyed on its weakness. It was a time of chaos, a nation adrift. From this turmoil, two powerful forces emerged, both determined to unite China, but with vastly different visions. The nationalists, led by Chiang Kai-shek, envisioned a modern, centralized state. Opposing them were the communists, under Mao Zedong, who promised a revolution led by the peasants. Their rivalry would define China's destiny. But before they could settle their differences, a greater threat loomed. The Empire of Japan, with its own ambitions for Asia, launched a full-scale invasion in 1937. Cities like Nanjing were plunged into horror, and the nation bled. Yet, amidst unimaginable suffering, the Chinese people did not break. Resistance movements sprang up, and the fight for survival forged a new sense of national identity. When World War II ended and Japan was defeated, China was exhausted but free from occupation. The brief truce between the nationalists and communists shattered, and civil war erupted once more. After years of brutal fighting, Mao's forces claimed victory. On October 1st, 1949, standing in Tiananmen Square, Mao Zedong declared the founding of the People's Republic of China. For the first time in over a century, China was unified, sovereign, and master of its own fate. The new government wasted no time. Radical reforms swept the nation. Land was taken from the wealthy and given to the peasants, and industries were brought under state control. Mao's vision was monumental: to transform China from a poor agrarian society into a mighty socialist state. But the path was filled with tragedy. The Great Leap Forward, a campaign launched in 1958 to supercharge industrial and agricultural output, was a catastrophe. Collective farming and backyard furnaces failed, leading to one of the worst famines in human history. Millions perished. The nation was scarred, but its leaders were not deterred. Then, in 1966, Mao unleashed the Cultural Revolution. It was a decade of political chaos aimed at purging society of old traditions and capitalist ideas. It turned neighbor against neighbor, student against teacher. Schools shut down, ancient culture was destroyed, and the economy ground to a halt. By the time the dust settled, China was weary and isolated. But as Mao's health faded in the 1970s, a subtle change began. The historic visit of U.S. President Richard Nixon in 1972 cracked open the door to the outside world. When Mao died in 1976, it marked the end of an era defined by revolution and turmoil. A new chapter was about to begin. The man who would write it was Deng Xiaoping. In 1978, Deng launched a series of reforms that would change everything. His philosophy was simple and pragmatic. It doesn't matter if a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. Ideology took a backseat to results. China opened its doors to foreign investment, allowed private businesses to flourish, and created special economic zones that became engines of growth. The result was an economic miracle unlike anything the world had ever seen. Throughout the 80s and 90s, China transformed at lightning speed. Fishing villages exploded into megacities. Millions of people moved from the countryside to work in factories, making goods for the entire world. China became the world's workshop, and in the process, lifted hundreds of millions of its own people out of poverty. This rapid growth, however, came with tensions. The government embraced economic freedom, but maintained tight political control. The protests at Tiananmen Square in 1989 were a stark reminder of this reality, showing the state's resolve to prioritize order above all else. Still, the economic momentum was unstoppable. By the turn of the 21st century, China wasn't just the world's factory, it was becoming a hub of innovation. The country poured money into science, technology, and education. High-speed rail lines crisscrossed the country, gleaming skyscrapers redefined city skylines, and companies like Alibaba and Tencent began to rival their Western counterparts. China was no longer just imitating, it was creating. Joining the World Trade Organization in 2001 fully integrated China into the global economy. Its influence grew, not just in manufacturing, but in finance, technology, and diplomacy. This newfound power was put on full display with ambitious global projects like the Belt and Road Initiative, a massive infrastructure network aimed at linking Asia with Africa and Europe, redrawing the map of global trade. Today, China is the world's second-largest economy, a leader in AI, space exploration, and renewable energy. From the ashes of imperial collapse, it has risen to become a modern superpower. But this rise brings new challenges: environmental pollution, growing inequality, and geopolitical tensions with other world powers. The story of modern China is a powerful testament to the resilience of a civilization and the unyielding will of its people. It's a journey from isolation to global leadership, from tradition to hypermodernity. A nation that once turned inward is now shaping the world. As we watch the 21st century unfold, one thing is certain: the story of China is far from over. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey through history fascinating, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss our next exploration. See you in the next one.